Exorcisms are one of the most controversial spiritual practices and are still carried out to this day on very rare occasions. Even some high-ranking members of the Catholic Church view exorcisms as an outdated, dangerous practice. So, what happens when exorcisms go too far? These are scary, failed exorcisms priests fear speaking about. The Exorcism of Joan Vollmer. This is one of the saddest, most disturbing exorcism cases I've ever read about. In January of 1993, Ralph Vollmer, a pig farmer from Victoria, Australia, became convinced that his wife Joan was possessed by demons. He claimed Joan was behaving erratically, using foul language more often, and was acting like an animal. Ralph enlisted the help of neighbors John and Leanne Reichenbach and their spiritual leader Leah Clugston, who concluded that Joan was inhabited by 10 demons. The group attempted to exorcise Joan by tying her down and depriving her of food and water. They later called in David Klinger and Matthew Nuske, who sealed up the house with cling wrap, destroyed all of Joan's possessions, and increased the already brutal methods being used in this apparent attempt to drive out the demons inside her. On January 30th, each member of the group physically attacked Joan to, quote, squeeze the demons out. After 48 hours with no change, Ralph sought help from a local Baptist minister who discovered Joan dead in the home, covered in flies, as the people responsible ate lunch. The minister called the police and a doctor who determined that Joan had died from a heart attack caused by pressure to her neck. Ralph held a funeral claiming Joan would rise from the dead. She didn't. And the extra messed up part, none of them served more than a handful of months in jail. The Exorcism of Michael Taylor. So Michael Taylor was a pretty average guy, at least on the outside, living in England with his wife and 5 youngsters. They were a classic nuclear family, happy and seemingly normal. But then Michael got involved with this group called the Christian Fellowship. This church was led by a young woman named Mary Robinson, just 21 years old. Mary and Michael started spending a lot of time together, and things started getting very unsettling. They'd hold church services where they spoke in tongues and performed these dramatic exorcisms on their congregation members. And then Christine Taylor, Michael's wife, accused him of having an affair with Mary. The tension between them just exploded. In response to the accusations and growing fears, they decided to conduct a massive exorcism on Michael, and it lasted 24 hours straight. By the end of it, the priests were completely drained and terrified, but they claimed that they'd expelled all the demons from him. But just 2 hours after this grueling exorcism, Michael went on a horrific rampage. He brutally killed his wife and their dog, and when the police found him, he was wandering the streets with no clothes, covered in BL-OOD, and it wasn't his. Michael was eventually sent to Broadmoor Hospital, a high-security psychiatric facility. In 2008, attempts were made to free a woman known to the press simply as Julia from demonic possession. The exorcisms were carried out by a man named Dr. Richard E. Gallagher, an Ivy League educated psychiatrist who teaches at Columbia University and New York Medical College. He's a man of science, but has also taken an interest in demonic possession over the course of his career, attempting to differentiate between cases that can clearly be explained as mental illness and ones that go far beyond. He's claimed to have seen some pretty disturbing, inexplicable things. One of his creepiest cases was with Julia. She was a middle-aged woman who claimed to be part of a satanic cult, even calling herself the Queen. She'd come to a local priest convinced that she was being attacked by a demon, and the priest, unsure of how to handle the situation, referred her to an exorcist, who then reached out to Dr. Richard E. Gallagher. At first, Gallagher was skeptical, but was quickly drawn into the case. To him, it seemed like Julia was having a genuine struggle with possession. Gallagher helped set up an exorcism team to work with her. During the sessions, bizarre things were said to have happened. Objects would fly off shelves around her, and she revealed personal details about Gallagher's life, like the death of his mother and the behavior of his cats, things she just had no way of knowing. Then one night, Gallagher was on the phone with Julia's priest when they heard one of her demonic voices over the phone. But Julia hadn't been in the room with either of the men. In fact, she was miles and miles away. The team saw her on several occasions, but she seemed ambivalent about the whole thing. She seemed to really enjoy some of the powers she displayed during her trances and eventually called a halt to the sessions. About a year later, Gallagher heard from Julia again though, this time to tell him that she was dying of cancer. She was asked if she wanted further help. She said she'd think about it, but Gallagher never heard from her again after that. The infamous case of the Smurl family. The Smurls lived in a home in West Pittston, Pennsylvania. Starting in 1974, they reported experiencing all sorts of terrifying things going on in their home. Everything from foul smells and strange noises to actual physical attacks from some unseen force. They had no explanation for what was going on other than something from the beyond, something inexplicable that had to have been causing these things to happen. The Smurls began to believe their home was haunted by a demonic spirit. Eventually, they reached out to paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren, two of the most famous or infamous, depending on how you look at it. The Warrens performed several investigations and claimed the presence in the house was indeed a powerful demon, but the haunting didn't seem to go away. Janet Smurl later claimed that an unidentified priest performed 3 exorcisms in their home. According to her, these exorcisms were unsuccessful because the demon avoided the rites by moving between the 2 units of their double-block home and even followed the family whenever they tried to leave. Anna Ecklund was born in 1908 in Iowa. From August 18th to December 23rd of 1928, she underwent a series of exorcisms. Anna's possession was reportedly triggered by an encounter with her father, who said that she was involved in occult practices. Her condition began to come about with violent and bizarre behavior, which led her family to seek help from the church. Anna was said to exhibit extreme physical strength, speaking in languages she had no prior knowledge of, and began to show a strong aversion to sacred objects. A local priest, Father Theophilus Reisinger, was called in to perform the exorcisms, and some pretty disturbing stuff was said to have gone on. She'd have violent outbursts, her body would contort in all sorts of bizarre ways, and she'd speak in all sorts of different voices and languages. The exorcisms did seem to alleviate at least some of her symptoms temporarily, but Anna was never entirely the same. She'd still exhibit sudden odd behavior, but luckily never to the heightened degree as before. This case became one of the most documented and discussed exorcisms in recent history. The Tanacu Exorcism is one of the most controversial exorcism cases in history. So it's 2005 in Tanacu, a small village in Romania. A nun named Irina Cornici was believed to be possessed by demons. She was a 23-year-old woman with a history of mental illness, and her behavior had become increasingly erratic. Her family and the local Orthodox priests believed that she needed an exorcism to drive out whatever supposed demons were inside her. The exorcism was conducted by a priest named Daniel Corrigiano along with several other nuns. The process lasted for 3 days and it involved some pretty brutal methods. She was restrained with chains and subjected to intense physical and verbal torment. They made her fast and endure other harsh conditions. All of this took place in a small rundown monastery. As you can imagine, the conditions were absolutely horrific. By the end of the exorcism, she was finally fed, but she passed out. Ambulances arrived on the scene, but she died on her way to the hospital. On August 27, 2016 in Oklahoma City, a 33-year-old woman named Juanita Gomez was found dead in her mother's home. Her arms had been placed into the form of a cross. There was a wooden crucifix placed on her chest. According to her mother's boyfriend who came across the body, she was completely unrecognizable. The woman responsible was Juanita Gomez, Geneva's very own mother. Juanita claimed that she'd been attempting to perform an exorcism on her daughter who was possessed by the devil. It was highly likely that the whole possessed by the devil thing was just an act that she was putting on so she could plead insanity. It didn't work. It took the jurors about 20 minutes to find Juanita guilty of the crime, and she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In 2023 in Yunlin, Taiwan, a man died after a forced exorcism carried out by his own family. On December 2nd of 2023, the family of the 28-year-old man named Chen believed he was possessed by evil spirits and decided to perform an exorcism they thought would cure him. Chen had been acting differently, coming home late, not eating or drinking for days, and when his condition didn't improve after a hospital visit, his family became convinced that his problems weren't medical but supernatural. So they went ahead with this exorcism ritual at their home, right in front of an ancestral shrine. Chen was restrained and saliva removal was used as part of the process, believing this would help rid him of whatever was affecting him. Tragically, it all ended with Chen's death. The suspected cause was suffocation. The infamous "devil made me do it" case. In 1981, a young man named Arne Johnson was accused of stabbing his landlord, Alan Bono, to death during an argument at a party. During his trial, Arne's defense claimed that he was possessed by a demon when he committed the crime. Now, before all this happened, Arne's fiance's younger brother, David, had been having some serious issues that the family believed were due to demonic possession. They sought out the help of Ed and Lorraine Warren, who both concluded that David needed an exorcism to get rid of these supposed demons. During this exorcism, David reportedly levitated and even predicted that Alan Bono would be killed by Arne. Arne then pleaded with the demon, asking it to possess him instead. Months later, Arne ends up killing Bono. As much as the defense tried to claim that a demonic ghoul was actually the one responsible, you can't send a demon to jail, and the judge just wasn't buying it. Arne was convicted and was sentenced to 10 to 20 years, but only ended up serving 5 before being released. This was a pretty insane case, not just because of the wild claims made by the Warrens and the Johnson family, but because this was one of the first times that demonic possession was actually used as a legal defense in a criminal trial. Pretty insane when you think about it. The case of Clara Germana Cele is one of the most disturbing documented exorcism cases in history. Clara Germana Cele, a South African girl whose story dates back to 1906. She was a young student at St. Michael's Mission in Natal, South Africa. The story goes that she became possessed after making a pact with Satan, and even if she wasn't actually possessed, she had started exhibiting some very strange behavior. She'd speak in languages she supposedly had never learned, including Polish, German, French, and Norwegian. She also demonstrated what seemed like clairvoyance, revealing secrets about people she'd never met before, and she displayed signs of increased physical strength. She'd throw nuns around and beat them up. Witnesses claimed that Clara even levitated 5 feet off the ground during her possession. At times, holy water was used to bring her out of these states. Eventually, 2 Roman Catholic priests, Reverend Mansueti and Reverend Erasmus, performed a 2-day exorcism on her. During the exorcism, Clara reportedly tried to choke one of the priests with his stole and knocked the Holy Bible from his hands. The exorcism supposedly was successful, but then a year later, her symptoms returned and she was exorcised a second time. After that, though, it seemed like she was finally freed from whatever had been ailing her, and for 6 years she led a normal life. But in 1912, she died of heart failure. She was only 22 years old. With all that said, I've been your host James, and I will catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.